So here we are at the synthesize step. And the first part of the synthesize step, I'd like to take a look at a graphic to try and help you picture what we're doing here. Sorry, we're in the pro synthesize. Let's open this up. So what we are doing during the synthesize process is we are both progressing through as well as documenting our ladder of thought, is what I've called it. So we have already reviewed the types of notes, the fleeting notes, literature notes, realization, question, and evergreen notes during the note type um, blocks, the block type video. During this video, you're going to see these in action and really understand why they are separated into separate notes. As you work through these different note types, you are going up, stepping up through the complexity of your thought. So these are more simple thoughts and these are more complex thoughts. And you are going deeper into your connectivity of thought. So these thoughts later on, beginning with the realization notes, are actually more connected. So that's why you see this yellow box here that says synthesized zone. A synthesized note is a note that is deeply connected and well thought out. This happens in your realization notes in my process. A lot of people will keep it at the evergreen or permanent note or Zettelkasten note level. I've changed it a little bit because this is how this works for me. Again, if it works for you, great, use it. If not, you can modify. But you need to think about when are you getting into the synthesized zone. So as we increase our complexity of thought, as we increase our connectivity of thought, as we step up through the different block types, we go into the synthesized zone until we reach synthesized notes, which are what I call the evergreen Z notes. Um, you can print this out and sort of keep it with you as we are going to go through the rest of the lesson, because I think having it graphically represented in front of you may help. So, three things happen during synthesizing, and they may happen all at once for you. Or you may decide to create a process around one step at a time, right? For me, all these questions kind of get answered concurrently while I am synthesizing. But I'm going to break them down for this particular lesson and go through them each individually. And then again, however it works for your thinking process is how you need to make it work for you. So, what we're going to do is we are going to classify, clarify, and connect our smart notes. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to ask what type of block it is, which is the what, why did I write this down in the clarifying, which is the why, and when do I want to see this again, and how important is it, which is the how, which is the connect. So let's begin. I know that you just watched a lesson on block types, but it's worth revisiting these block types again within this context. The first thing you're going to do is classify the note blocks that you already have on your page. If you have taken your smart notes correctly, you will always have a collection of fleeting notes as well as probably the beginnings of either literature notes or realization notes. You may also have other fleeting notes that aren't from your reading. So as we go through each source on the page, on the source that we're going to look at here, we will talk about each block type and then you will see them get classified. So let's head over to the source. We're going off of the lesson page to go deep into the examples. But if you want to keep the outline for the lesson page open in your own Rome research while you watch this, you're certainly welcome to do so. So here we are in the source that we just did the pre-synthesis exercises on. And I always try to convince myself that if I wrote something down, that it must be absolutely vital information. And so I would hang on to everything that I wrote down, quotes, paraphrases, etc. I would hang on to it desperately and try to classify it all my own way. So I used to visit a fleeting note again and again and again, right? Similar to what you are doing when you revisit your highlights and your bookmarks and all the external sources. And so what happened was is that these notes, they really start to clutter up both your mind, and if you are using Rome research, they clutter up Rome. So my message behind this is don't feel pressured to do something with your fleeting notes. If you read them and they don't mean anything to you and they don't make a connection, just leave them there. They're on the source page, they're already connected, they're there for you to visit again if you ever want to, but you have marked them with an F note and you have marked the source complete and you know that you've looked at it once already, so you don't have to look at it 5 more times. So the fleeting notes on this page are all of these quotes that I have taken from this particular source. We're going to review again the what of the block types. We'll go into the when and the how as we get to connecting them. But for right now, we're just classifying. So we're going to talk about the what. So fleeting notes are represented within the graph by the tag F notes. I'm going to move over to my finished version of what a source synthesized look like, a synthesized source looks like, so that you can follow along. Don't be intimidated by what you see when you first see it, because we're going to go through it all in detail. So here we are. This is a completely synthesized source. So what you will see is that every one of, except for that one, of the simple quotes that came directly from the source have been tagged with the tag of F note. That's to tell me that F notes, they are used, they can be used within your academic writing. If they are used as direct quotes with attribution. These are all the initial notes that you collected from the source. F notes are always the words and ideas of other people, either direct quotes or copied content. They should never be used without attribution to the source material. As part of the collect process, an F note might have a sub-bullet or a piece of information, as in version 1, that represents, like this, oh, sorry, this piece here, that represents a thought that you had while consuming that specific content. Okay, it could be the beginnings of a literature note, which we're going to talk about, or it could be the beginnings of a realization note. We'll find that out. So fleeting notes are at the bottom of the layer of foundation for further thinking. They are the first step in the ladder of thought. Fleeting notes are also known as context snippets, F notes, or support notes. Some people call them different things. So you can see that within the completed synthesized source, I have all of the fleeting notes marked as F notes. That means I will never ever mistake them for my words, which can happen frequently, and I always know that they must have an attribution. Let's talk about literature notes. These are very, very important. I learned most of the literature note piece and some of the other pieces we're talking about here from Joel Chan's fantastic paper about knowledge synthesis. I have linked it in here further down. And if you have time, I think it's well worth you taking the time to go and read that paper. It will give you an abundance of ideas of your own. What is a literature note? Well, it is represented within the graph by the L note tag. And as you'll see, except for F notes, which go at the end of the quote, I preface every other piece of information with the type of note. The reason why I put it at the end here and I preface it here is because these are just more important. So it's just the way that it helps me visualize it in my mind. So a literature note, they are used within your academic writing as paraphrases with attribution. The literature notes are a simple restatement of the original text in the F note, but in your own words. So I never used to do this. And then I discovered that during the process of creating literature notes, I had a few advantages. They served two purposes for me. They enabled me to facilitate a deeper understanding of the material when I was forced into putting it into my own words. And they also ensured that I didn't change the meaning of the text from its original context. So during the process of literature notes, it's essential that you simply just restate what the fleeting note says, and you don't permit the influence of your own personal worldview, theories, or preconceived ideas. So, requiring an L note, which is what we do, requiring a literature note for every single fleeting note forces you to easily see where you are adding value to your own reading. There were so many times before I started the practice of writing literature notes that I thought that I had this great, insightful realization from this particular paragraph or quote. But then when I wrote the literature note, I realized that I wasn't having any kind of realization. I was simply just restating what I read, which in some ways is a mild form of plagiarism, right? So you want to make sure that you are, when you say you are adding ideas and when you say something is your own words, you make sure that it truly is your own words. It also really helps you think about that next step, right? Helps you think, well, this is just a literature note. So it's really just what I've already read. How can I add value to this? And a literature note will often uncover another question note, Z note, we'll talk about those in a minute, or R note that needs to be written. So let's take a look at the example of this, shall we? So let's look at this one, since we've already been talking about the view of the author. The actual quote was, "At roughly the same time, the romantic view of the author was also challenged by the predominantly Anglo-American methods of analytical bibliography and new criticism, which focused respectively on the physical properties and internal semiotics of the text." And so I have simply read that, restated it in my own words. From a critical perspective, new criticism and the related methods of analytical bibliography suppressed the importance and the role of the author by approaching textual analysis with a focus on the text itself, its physical properties, and internal semiotics. Okay, so that's just me restating that, and we'll go to the R note next. You'll notice in this L note that I have actually put we've lost our little topics side panel. I have actually put a keyword at the beginning of the L note. I find myself doing that frequently. It's a way of linking that we're going to cover, but it's also a way of me, again, continuing to collect new keywords that are important to my research. So I'm just going to put literary theory in here. Okay. And again, when we get to connections, we'll talk more about that. So what's next? Well, next we start to clarify why we wrote that down. And so we've done the classify. Now we're going to clarify why we wrote it down. So again, in this section, I was highly influenced by Joel Chan's paper, Knowledge Synthesis. It's linked in this section. You would be very lucky if you went and you read that paper. So the next question you need to ask yourself during this synthesize process is why? Why did I take this note? And this is where the realization notes come in. So in other Zettelkasten systems that folks are using, the ones that I have watched and learned from, they're moving these kinds of notes, these realization notes, which are original thoughts and statements and clarifications, they're moving them onto a page of their own, and they are calling them evergreen or Zettelkasten notes. I changed my process to add a few layers between that step and it becoming a full-blown Zettel, because I believe that the extra few layers help with turning knowledge into production. So I'm also a big fan of blocks. And I find that when things are in pages, they are more difficult to manage in terms of they're not as nimble with referencing them, dragging them around, replacing them, moving them. And so I try to keep big blocks of, an atomic note, a block of text that contains high value content that I think that I might actually use in my output. I try and keep them in blocks, and I save the Q notes and Z notes for headers and statements and section things. We're going to talk about that in a second. So, a realization note, what is it? A realization note is a realization that you, the reader, has above and beyond what has been stated in the fleeting note. It is the connection that you make in your head between that idea and something else that you've read, or it's an idea that you would like to pursue. It's just something where you have added, as a researcher, as a thinker, as an academic, added something additional beyond the literature note. So if you were to be referencing that literature note in your paper, you could actually have a section of text underneath that talks about your contribution to that literature note. So let's take a look at one here. We've already read the L note for this. So my R note on this piece is, in the mid 20th century, new criticism eliminated both the author and the reader from literary theory and experience. Okay, so this is the new thought. So we already know that they didn't consider much about the author, and that they did because of the new type of criticism, but they didn't talk about the reader. And in my research, this triangulation of the reader, the author, and the text, and what comes in the middle is the collaborative authorship, is very important. So this is the beginnings of me realizing that not only had they excluded the author, but they had actually never included the reader as an element of literary theory. So this actually creates a a new piece of value that will be interesting to me when I am trying to get to write my paper. Okay, so let's talk about question notes. What are they? Okay, what I have found is often that people will create what they're calling an evergreen note with an idea that is not um, robust enough, meaning it has not been supported by enough context, research, etc. It's simply a statement of their opinion or a statement of their belief or something that they have read that they have restated. So, in my mind, and if you look back at the ladder of thought, Q notes and Z notes should be super connected pages. So they should have multiple blocks on them. All of the blocks are there in service of that page. So a question note is the beginning of a permanent note or a Z note or an evergreen note. You'll hear me alternating and using different names for that type of note, the evergreen note. And why do I do that? Well, it's because so many people call this note by different types of names that I want to make sure that you hear them all associated with this note type so that when you hear them spoken out in the community, you can make the connection. You can say, oh, well, that's what Lisa Marie calls a synthesize note. And oh, that's what, Bohan calls a Zettelkasten, and whoever is speaking about that particular type of note. So the question note is the beginning of an evergreen note. The question note says that you have something that you're not quite sure you could put out there as a robustly researched, thesis statement, but you think you might be getting there. And so you want to collect everything onto a page. It is used within your academic writing as an exploratory staging space for deeper thinking and connecting between all note types. So, in my mind, question notes are the beginnings of what will become either the section headers, the chapter headers, or even sometimes the paragraph, sentence of the paragraph within your outline. It means that it's something that you're going to put into your paper that has a lot of supporting evidence and information that is included underneath. So it sits at the page level, and it always has the question as the title of the page, prefaced with a cue. So it poses a question or a theory, and you know that it needs further support or exploration before you can actually make it an evergreen note. It's on its way to becoming a Z note. So here we have a question note. And how did we get there? Well, the brilliant thing about taking your notes this way is that you can always follow your train of thought. So here is your ladder of thought. Here is your fleeting note at the bottom. From this fleeting note, you wrote a literary note. And then from this literary note, you had an idea that you wanted to document. So here is the realization note I wrote. The literary gatekeepers are resistant to the legitimacy of the creative entrepreneur as an author because of the enduring ideal of the romantic author. A solitary genius would not collaborate with others or dirty their mind with the commercial aspects of their art. So I had this idea from reading this particular fleeting note and this literature note, where in which they said um, that literary scholars have made it clear through the work that they have presented that they still believe that the romantic author is really the only definition of author that is valid for literary theory and criticism, right? So I had this idea. However, I would never make this idea into a page and have that be a fixed statement of my belief, because you can't get a fixed statement of belief from a single sentence in a single source. Academically, you have to support that through several other sources, and maybe even find sources that contest that idea as well. So I have moved it into a question note, and I have said, I've prefaced it with a Q note tag, and I have asked the question, do the literary gatekeepers consider the creative entrepreneurs a legitimate authorship identity? I want to know that, and I want to research that. And I think this block supports it, but it certainly doesn't support that enough for me to make it an evergreen note, right? If you click on the question note, you'll see that what will happen is as you start to link to that question note, we're going to talk about connecting in a moment, everything will come under as a linked reference underneath the page, and then it will be very easy for you to then, during your outline synthesizing, to start adding text to the main page. So that's your question note. Now your evergreen note. So, like as we said, I call evergreen notes a synthesis note because I think that that's a great name because it means you've fully synthesized an idea. You haven't just read something and then restated it. You haven't had a realization that added value but really wasn't robust enough for you to write a whole chapter on it, right? So Z notes are used within your academic writing as a representation of a resolved and converted Q note. Z notes are always at the page level, just like Q notes. Sometimes they're just simply changed from a Q to a Z. And they have a single declarative title. So a claim, a theory, an argument, a problem, and it's always prefaced by a Z. A Z note is synthesized, and synthesized means right at the top of your connectivity of thought. So it's densely linked with other R notes, possibly other Z notes and Q notes. And the context of a Z note can be used in multiple contexts. The content of a Z note can be used in multiple context for multiple projects. So if you are an academic who's beyond the PhD and you're into actually trying to publish your work, congratulations. I wish I was beyond mine. Then you can actually begin to use Z notes as a collection to become a representation of all of your personal synthesized knowledge. And then it's very easy for you to take these Z notes and the content within the Z notes and mix and match them in other projects and reference them in other things that you are working on. So that's how I kind of define a Z note. A little bit different than other people, but this is the way that it works in my brain. However it works in your brain is fine. So let's have a representation of a Z note. So here we are. I have said in the mid 20th century, new criticism eliminated both the author and the reader from literary theory and experience and focused solely on the text as a self contained, self referential item. I nested that under a Z note that said the environment required for collaborative authorship did not exist until the digital revolution of the 20th century. And the reason that is a Z note is because I have already done tons and tons of research on that, and I feel quite confident that I have enough robust support to actually make that statement. Now, if you were to click on this, you'll see that there isn't any robustness, but that's because you're not in my personal database, so you don't see everything that has been done. But you can imagine that that is completely backed up. Oh, sorry, we need to go back here. So that is an example of a Z note. Next, we're going to be talking about connecting. So now you're on to the when. The big question, the most important question in Rome research, and the one that is going to really simplify your create process is, when do I want to see this again?